Check, check. Yeah, okay, good. Happy Valentine's Day indeed. Well done. Oh, I love my job. Okay. Whew. So, how far through this did we get last time?
Cultural revolution.
So we got stuck in the Enlightenment someplace. Is that right? All right, so let's run through this again from the top, just to make sure we're good on this. The Enlightenment in general is a response to what? Absolute monarchies. The Enlightenment in general is a response to absolute monarchies, and people being frustrated with the fact that absolute monarchs are abusing their power on a fairly regular basis. One of the famous examples that we talk about is Louis XIV. Louis XIV is king of what country? France. His name's Louis, come on. And Louis XIV, his crowning achievement is the building of the Palace of Versailles. A gigantic structure whose cost today, if it were built, is over $1 billion. Sitting on 1,500 acres of private property. That is a phenomenal use of power and wealth. And most people would argue that's a phenomenal abuse of power and wealth. And that's the kind of thing that the Enlightenment takes issue with. Nick?
Could we build the Palace of Versailles today with the current state of labor unions and working hours and wages?
Yeah. Yeah, we could rebuild. We could build anew the Palace of Versailles, but it would still be a phenomenally expensive undertaking simply given its size. It's big. It's very big. So, the Enlightenment is an attempt to reduce the power of monarchs, of nobles, of the church. And if you're going to take power away from kings and nobles and the church, by default, who are you giving it to? Right, who's left? The people, the common people, which means we're talking about what kind of government? Democracy.
Well, it also could be given to the military.
Yeah, but that's just scary. All right, so these philosophers all have unique ideas on how democracy would best be constructed, or at least what sorts of rights should be given to the people. So, John Locke believes that all human beings possess natural rights. Life, liberty, and property. And we take that and we modify it when we create the United States, and we call it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. So one of the things you're going to see as we go through this is how far-reaching the Enlightenment is. This isn't just in France. This isn't just in England. This is throughout all Western nations, and then spreading beyond those Western nations to influence humans on multiple continents. People will begin to go, you know, that feels right. I feel like I should have the right to live and be free and not be persecuted. That makes sense. Montesquieu believed that your average person is basically good, but leaders become corrupt because they have power. People are basically good, but leaders become corrupted by their own power. So Montesquieu says, well, then it's kind of a no-brainer solution. If you give one person power and that corrupts them, what's the answer? Don't give one person power. Give power to 3 groups of people: executive, legislative, judicial. Break power up into 3 components and build a government that is separating the power. Make sure that each part can put a check on the other 2 and balance that power. Did you guys learn about checks and balances in civics? Did you learn about the separation of the branches in civics? That's where we got the idea. Nick?
Where would government agencies like the EPA and the FBI fall?
That's kind of a natural extension of bureaucracy, recognizing that even those three branches can't possibly execute all of the tasks assigned to them. And at some point, especially as civilization gets larger, you have to divvy up the work. We're going to have another guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Hey. Huh? Next door. You want Miss Beezer's class? We swapped rooms. Okay. There's no Giuseppe in here. All right, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Any guesses where he's from? France, yeah. No, he's German. Duh. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he's French, I'm kidding, argues that governments are actually a form of contract. And contracts have two parties that are equally invested. So Rousseau says that government is a social contract. The people agree to give up some of their freedom, and in exchange, the government agrees to take care of the people. People give up some of their freedom. Government agrees to take care of the people. Now, what happens in a contract if one side breaks their side of it? Then the other side gets to walk away. Absolutely. If I go to buy a house and I agree on a price to buy that house, and then I go to bring the check to the table and get the keys, and the other person's like, no, I'm sorry, that's going to be twice as much. I'm like, no, it's not, because I'm not going to buy it now. Hi. Nope, try next door. Okay. We're just messing with everybody's head today. So, Rousseau, and actually Locke too. John Locke says, if your government's not working, if your government is not taking care of you, guess what you have the responsibility to do? Burn it to the ground. You have the responsibility to overthrow your government if it ain't working. That's a pretty huge responsibility. Your job is not to sit there and take it. Be like, oh, shucks. It's too bad I'm having my rights taken away. I wish I had more freedom. Oh, well. No. Locke and Rousseau are like, get up off your butt and fix it. It's your government. Paul?
But isn't if the government's working for you, your personal opinion or not?
Right. The flip side is if the government is taking care of its people, then you don't necessarily get to have everything you want. Because everything you want might actually hurt other people. So let's say that what I really want to do is I want to walk down the middle of 495 in rush hour traffic. Because I can, because I'm a person and I have the right to life and liberty. So guess what, all you thousands of people trying to get to work? You can't hit me, neener, neener. Do I have that right in a social contract environment? Do I have the right to disrupt the lives of thousands of other people just because I want to? No! I deserve to get hit by a car at that point. Do I have the right to sit in a crowded theater on the night of a, movie premiere, and just as the lights go down and the film starts, to stand up in the back and yell fire? Anybody want to say, yeah, freedom of speech? No, I don't. I don't have that right. I don't have the right to disrupt the lives of hundreds of other people and put their safety in jeopardy because I feel like saying a word. That's the idea of social contract. You don't get to do everything you want, and in exchange, the government takes care of you. Nick?
Yeah, according to the Supreme Court from their decision in 1917 or 18,
Yep.
Your freedom of speech is given up if what you are saying or doing presents a clear and present danger.
Yep, exactly. The clear and present danger clause is the key. If what I'm doing is going to hurt other people, I don't have the right to do it anymore. And we get a lot of that from Voltaire, which is actually a made-up name. His real name is not Voltaire. His real name is François-Marie Arouet. But he calls himself Voltaire. That's the name that he writes his books under. which is a good idea that he used a fake name to write his books because he made a lot of people mad. He spent a lot of time in prison because he didn't like the nobles. He thought they were fundamentally deceptive and treacherous and selfish. He didn't like the church because he thought they were a bunch of liars. He didn't like women. I don't mean he's gay, I just mean he didn't respect women. He thought they were weak and soft and overly emotional. He didn't like blacks, he didn't like Jews. He didn't like the lower class. He thought they were a bunch of stupid, ignorant, superstitious peasants. And yet here's the kicker. We've pretty much established the fact that he doesn't think much of anybody. And yet he advocated fiercely for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Where do you see those show up in our society? First Amendment. So do you see how heavily we were influenced by all these ideas? I mean, we just basically taught you 8th grade civics in 4 people. Life, liberty, property. 3 branches of government, checks and balances. Social contract. First Amendment. Congratulations, you just passed 8th grade civics. 4 guys come up with the ideas for an entirely different form of government and society. All right, questions on them? And again, I know this is fast. On the Enlightenment alone, I spend 5 or 6 days with the academic class because there's so much we can talk about. You're getting it in 20 minutes. So if you have questions, please ask. Emily? Absolutely. I mean, these become the foundations of most modern day governments, which is why most modern day governments in Europe are representative democracies, just like ours. Now, they may still hang on to the royalty as, nostalgia. You bring the Queen of England out every once in a while to wave, you kick her out of a plane for the opening ceremony of the Olympics, whatever. But the Queen of England does not rule anymore. Right. They still have a King of Spain. The King of Spain is actually pissing off a lot of people right now because the King of Spain is very wealthy. And at a time when Spain's unemployment rate is somewhere around 40%, the King of Spain is running off on safaris in Africa and shooting elephants and breaking his hip and requiring tens of thousands of dollars in surgery. People are like, so what's the point again? Why are we keeping you around? Right. Sahil? Did people recognize it? How do you mean? Oh, so do they see this happening? Absolutely. And again, it's these kinds of ideas that drive these revolutions. If these Enlightenment ideas never come out, nobody in the United States is going to go, yeah, we should kick out the British. Because nobody in the United States will have the idea that we deserve these rights and freedoms. Without the Enlightenment ideas, nobody in France is going to go, you know what? Our monarch does abuse his power, and we deserve to be treated better. I mean, we've been talking about monarchies for hundreds of years worth of history, right? What took so long? Well, what took so long was a better option. People knew they weren't happy with absolute monarchs, but there was never a better alternative. Now we have one. All right, other questions about this? Emily? I mean, it depends on how you want to compartmentalize history. Oftentimes, we tend to look at the Enlightenment as only the ideas itself, and then we have this whole other period of history that we look at as the revolutions. But really, they are pretty connected. You can't really separate them. Anything else? All right, very quickly then. Karl Marx, the guy with the awesome beard down here, proposes an alternative to democracy. Or I guess it would be in some ways an extension of democracy. The basic idea of democracy is what? Power to the people. Everybody has a say, and everybody has an equal say, right? Your vote is just as good as mine once you're old enough to vote. Karl Marx says, why are we stopping there? Why not have social equality? Why not have economic equality? So Karl Marx envisions a society where the people at the bottom, which he calls the proletariat, the people at the bottom of society, the lower class, the middle class, the working class, that those people will finally reach a day where they're fed up and they've had enough. They've had enough of working their butts off and barely scraping by, and then seeing fabulously wealthy people with their pleasure yachts and their huge houses and their servants and their fancy food. Karl Marx predicted that there would be a day where the proletariat would rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie. And when that day happened, there would be some strife and there would be some revenge. But that eventually what would happen is that when things settled down and the lower class ran society, that they would have learned, by having lived through lifetimes of persecution, they would have learned some valuable lessons, and the society that they would create would have no social class. All people would be equal. All people would share society's resources evenly. So we take Kobe Bryant's $80 million contract and we split it amongst all the teachers at this school. Kobe still makes $100,000, all the other teachers in the building make $100,000, and we all walk away equals. He can go back and play basketball for $100,000 a year. I can keep teaching all you lovely children for $100,000 a year. Social equals. Yes, sir.
If socialism sounds so equal and interesting, why does it not work whenever it's done?
That's the million-dollar question. Why doesn't it work? All right, so here's the question, or here's the answer then. What is Kobe Bryant's incentive to continue to be one of the premier basketball players in the world? All right. I mean, right, possible options are money, pride, fame. What socialism does is it takes the money off the table as a motivator. And so now all you are left with are intrinsic motivators. What if we got rid of grades? What if there were no A's or B's or C's or D's or F's? And I simply decided when I thought you had learned enough, and then I sent you along to the next class. How many of you wouldn't be as driven to work hard and learn? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Now, they don't pay teachers very much, but what if they stop paying me? What would be my incentive to continue to work hard to learn as much history as I could? What would be my incentive to stay up late at night grading your papers so that you could get feedback on how well you were learning? Right, at that point it would be totally intrinsic. And as long as I still loved you guys enough and loved what I did enough to do it, the money wouldn't matter. But if the money becomes a motivator, and I'm not making much, do I work as hard? If you don't get grades, will some of you work as hard? That's one of the inherent flaws with socialism, is that some people's basic human nature requires extrinsic motivation. You know, some of you as kids wouldn't do your chores unless you were bribed and or threatened, you know, either way. And that's where socialism falls through. If we pay everybody the same, will some people work as hard as others? No. Sahil? Middle class. Yes. Well, he was describing a different kind of utopia. He was describing a utopia, and he wouldn't have used that word, but he was describing a society that only became good by learning its lessons from when things were bad. He didn't think that you could just have a perfect society. Well, and again, like I said, there are some flaws in that thinking. Especially, you could probably go back to even somebody like our friend Ibn Khaldun and his whole 3 generations. Let's say the lower class could pull off this revolution, and let's say they did then create a totally equal society because they had learned firsthand how rough it was. What happens in the 2nd generation? Right. So now maybe they lose the motivation to keep it. Or maybe that's all they know, and so it's easier to maintain. We don't know. We never get there. All right, other things that change culture. With industrialization. With industrialization, people work differently. One of the fun things that we find is that as factories develop, as mechanized labor becomes possible, people no longer have to be as highly skilled to do work. If we go back to a time when the automobile was first created, what did you have to know to build a car? Nick?
Woodworking, metalworking, how to make an engine, how to make tires. You had to make every piece of the car yourself.
Right. If I were to get a job in a car manufacturing plant today, what would I need to know? All right, we don't want to oversimplify this because obviously there are some skills involved, but I would not need to know everything there is to know about. Right. I would need to know how to operate one part of the assembly process, and that part might be something as simple as pressing a button. And that's all I would need to do. So with industrialization, we find that it dramatically alters the way that people work and the knowledge that people have to work, which is why we can now have an issue like child labor. You're going to see children hired to work in factories. Why? They're cheaper. There's not a lot of skill needed. And they're small, so they can fit in little tiny places that adults couldn't. And they're cheap. You don't have to pay them very much. Kids don't have a lot of needs. It's not like your kids have a mortgage to pay. Right. That's why allowances are so cheap. But child labor will now become a fact of life for many lower class families trying to make ends meet. But we were also saying the same thing about the quality, the value of children. Because in middle and upper class families, those children will now be treasured. They need an education. They need to not work so that they can learn and improve their life. And so when we look at what industrialization does to quality of life, it will radically improve the quality of life for some people. It will make life easier. It will make goods more accessible. It will make food easier to get. It will make goods cheaper so more people can have stuff. But for the people at the bottom, quality of life will suffer in some ways. Is it healthy to work in a coal mine? No. Is it healthy to work in a poorly ventilated factory? No. Is it healthy to work in a stone quarry? No. So there are pros and cons to this, just like everything else. Again, you can't look at history as a steady progress of things becoming better and better. There are always pros and cons. Now, we had a couple of questions. Trina, you had one? Okay. Emily, did you still have one? Right. I mean, it's like today. There are children, I know you guys hate to be called children, but there are children in this school that have to go to work when they're done here in order to make ends meet in their family. That whatever work they make at whatever job they have, that's the difference between their family being able to stay in their home and eating and not. And that's happening here in Loudoun County. For most of you, that's not the life you have. For most of you, you come to school because it's a luxury. And then you get to go play sports for fun. Or you get to go practice an instrument. Or you get to go home and play video games. For most of you, that's the life that you have, because you have now become a valued commodity rather than an essential piece of the family's survival. That's what we're going to begin to see take place during this period of industrialization. Children will more and more become these valued possessions, and less become this essential piece of family survival. It's a huge transition. It's the reason you're all sitting here today. Otherwise, you'd have been put to work long ago, like back when you were 8. You'd have been working someplace for some amount of money that would contribute to your family's survival. And that would have been your education. Learning skills. Trina? Okay. You can listen to this later, but social contract is essentially the agreement that the people agree to be governed and the government agrees to take good care of its people. All right, we're also going to see the feminist movement begin during this period. Women will break into the workforce. They will get jobs in factories and in coal mines. They will get jobs in sewing factories. They will get more jobs in education as teachers. And with those improved opportunities, women and some men in society as well will begin to question why women aren't trusted with more. One of the things we talked about last Friday was that if women have the ability to raise the next generation, that speaks volumes about how awesome they are, not how limited they are. And so if they're smart enough and skilled enough to raise children to functioning adulthood, why can't they work in society? Why can't they have an influence in the government? And you find women going, yeah, why can't we? You find some men going, oh crap, we're in trouble now. So again, you're going to see significant changes in the way that society is structured and put together. None of these things are taken care of quickly, but these are all going to make significant changes to society. Speaking of society, populations go up worldwide. If you ever, and there's a lot of them, and I'll see if I can find them for you and put it on the website, there are a lot of animated graphs that show the growth of human population over time. And it seems like it's one of those linear growth curves for a while, and then all of a sudden it explodes and it turns into exponential growth. And you just see this graph take off going vertically in less and less and less amounts of time. As population grows all over the world, you're going to begin to see issues like immigration become even more important. People leaving one country to go to another. Now, today we take that for granted. Airplanes, trains, automobiles, all of that stuff has made that kind of travel not only possible, but common. It's not surprising. I was born in Ohio. I lived in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Virginia. And for some of you that have never left home, you're like, all right. And for some of you that have lived in other countries, you're like, so what? I've lived in 5 countries. I'm not impressed with your 6 states, Mr. Ackerman. Immigration will now become something that is possible. People now have the ability to choose not only the town that they will live and work in, but they will also have the ability to choose the country, the government, the hierarchy that they live under. Do you think that untouchables in India, if airplanes had been around, would have stayed in India?
No.
Good point. They would have to. They don't have money. But if faster transportation existed, do you think they would find a way to get out?
Yeah.
Maybe more of them.
They try.
Right. Now, we're also this time going to see the peak and then the end of the slave trade. And we already talked about how over 10 million Africans are taken from Africa to the Western Hemisphere. We also had 500,000 plus Africans taken out of East Africa to Muslim empires in the Middle East and India. And those are just the biggest examples of slavery that we see. But all of that is going to result in population change. All of that could essentially be thrown under the category of immigration. Yes, sir?
Why does Africa become the center of the origin of the slave trades, where all the slaves come from?
Because the system was already in place. There already was a slave trade. So it's easier to expand an existing system than to create one from scratch.
I mean, why do the slaves come from Africa in general?
Because they're there. Because, I mean, you couldn't start a slave trade out of Russia because Russia didn't have a slave trade in the first place, which meant you would have had to convince people that slavery was a justifiable exchange.
Why did they choose the people in Africa to export as slaves?
Why did who choose?
Why did the Europeans choose to export Africans as slaves and not people from Asia or the Middle East?
Oh, well, because they tried to enslave the natives in the Americas first, and they all died off from disease. So who's close by? Africa, and the slave trade already exists. Africans could survive European diseases because they're already exposed to them as being part of that old world culture. They already had agricultural experience, with many of those large African kingdoms being agriculturally based. So you've already got the skill set, you've already got the institution in place. They're affordable. Why look further? We're also going to see population go up because there's less disease and nutrition is improved. Remember those corn and potatoes that came from the New World? That makes life better everywhere for people. So what this means is that having children is a safer proposition. They are more likely to survive. Child mortality rates before the Industrial Revolution, there was a 1 in 3 chance your child would die within the first 2 years of life. Can you imagine that as a parent? And I don't know how many of you have younger siblings that you were old enough to remember being born, but usually pregnancy and giving birth is a pretty awe-inspiring time in people's lives. Like when parents give birth to a child, it blows your mind, the fact that such a thing is possible. And then you hold that newborn and you're like, I just created a life. That's awesome. And then you have that moment of, I'm responsible for this life. Holy crap. But imagine giving birth to that child knowing that there is a 33% chance, 1 in 3, that that child's not going to live past 2. Imagine how traumatic that must be for parents, and or how hard that must make it for them to connect with their kids emotionally. I mean, it makes you wonder how many parents were kind of disinterested in their kids until they got to a safer age, like 5 or 6. Be like, all right, now I can love you, because you're not going to die, probably. Imagine in those agricultural families where having 9 or 10 or 11 kids was normal. Imagine how many kids you would bury as parents. Isn't that awful to think about? And then we look at society commercially. And one of the questions that the Enlightenment helps to raise is, are social classes fair? Should only nobles, should only people born into a certain class have the ability to be wealthy and to have power Or should everybody have that opportunity? The Enlightenment says yes. Yes, they should. Everybody should have the opportunity to be wealthy and powerful. Now, when we talk about industrial versus traditional, do you think everybody's happy about the Industrial Revolution? No. Skilled craftspeople, people that know how to make a dress from start to finish, people that know how to build a wagon from start to finish, people that knew how to build a gun or a sword from start to finish, are looking at the industrial process going, man, this sucks. They don't need me anymore. Do you think they probably protested some of these changes? You think there were incidents of sabotage when factories were opening? Yeah. So again, this is not one big, long, happy tale of progress. Every step of the way, there are pros and cons. Now, let me give you some quick snapshots of what shows up. Steam engine. One of the versions invented by James Watt. There are several versions, and they all kind of build on each other. But what the steam engine allows us to do is to build factories, to build railroads, to build ships that no longer rely on what? The wind. Can you imagine how much easier Columbus's life would have been if he would have been on a steamship? So we're going to have faster production, faster travel, travel that doesn't depend on natural elements like wind and currents. It's going to lead to better forms of communication like the telegraph, where you can send messages electrically rather than by paper on a horse. Other fun things that happen as a result. Something called interchangeable parts. Now, you guys have all seen this Promethean pen before, right? And most of you know that there's this little plastic nub in the end. This little plastic nub has a habit of falling out and falling on the floor and never being seen again. Prior to industrialization, how would this whole thing have been made? By hand, one part. Or maybe in multiple parts, but that fit together only because they had been crafted together. And so if I lost this little plastic nub, does this thing ever work again? No. Why does it work now if I lose this little plastic nub? I just get another one. Interchangeable parts. They manufacture 1 million of these, each one exactly the same. And they manufacture 1 million of these, each one exactly the same. And if a part breaks, you swap it out. You can do it with weaponry, especially guns. You can do it with cars. I get a flat tire, I put a new tire on. I don't have to get a new car. That allows for different weaponry. Things like the repeating rifle. Instead of the musket where you have to reload each shot, and each shot is unique in terms of its powder composition and its wadding and the ball. Now you have mass-produced bullets, each one that should, in theory, shoot the same way, fired by a gun, and any bullet can be used in any gun, and if any part of any gun breaks, it can be replaced with any part from any other gun. This will now lead to the speeding up of weaponry. We'll find ways to shoot guns faster. And so instead of one shot every 30 seconds, pretty soon it's going to be one shot a second. Or now, 300 shots a second. How's that for scary? That would hurt a lot. And because all of this is starting in Europe, Guess who now has a phenomenal advantage over the rest of the planet?
European.
The Europeans. So they will dominate in terms of production. They will be able to outproduce everybody else in the world in any area. Production of cotton for clothing. Who's going to be able to make more?
The British.
Right. British factories are going to be able to outperform India. Who's going to be able to mine more coal? Somebody in Europe. Who's going to be able to produce more steel? Somebody in Europe. So what does this do for labor? Do you rely as much on skilled, knowledgeable workers? Not as much. You still need them, but you don't need as many. What does this do to foreign countries? Can foreign countries compete with European countries head to head? No, they're going to lose. They can't make as much and they can't make it as cheaply. So now what are your options if you're India or China or someplace in Africa? What do? What are your choices, Sahil? Either copy, become like Western Europe, which maybe means you have to sacrifice what? Your culture. So option one is westernize. Become like the West and perhaps sacrifice some of your own identity. Or what's option two? Attack them, which is probably not going to work well given that their weapons are better. Trade, but what are you going to be able to offer in exchange? Are you going to be able to offer them processed, manufactured goods? Become their supplier of raw materials. Minimize your economy to the most basic part, the raw materials. So if you're India, you will no longer be the center of the world for textiles. You will no longer be making the clothing and the rugs and whatever else from cloth that people desired. All you're going to do now is convert all of your land to cotton farming. You're going to pack it all up and throw it on a boat headed back to England. What does that do to your culture? Yeah. Yeah, it's going to minimize your culture. You are no longer a significant contributor. You're just doing the simple process of growing or digging or harvesting and throwing it on a boat and saying, please bring me back something because I can't make it on my own now. Let's say, for example, that we suddenly lost the ability to manufacture stuff and you guys are all now functioning on your own. Are any of you going to be able to make as nice of clothes as you are currently wearing?
No.
Are you going to be able to make your own computer without somebody sending you the parts? No. You're going to be able to build your own house without somebody sending you all the tools? No. Now, just to throw it up on the screen so it gets stuck in the recording, this is one of the other things that industrialization does. Electricity. This is the world at night as of 2000. What do you see about the spread of industrialization?
Europe,
Is it equal? Does everybody get the benefits of industrialization? No.
widely spread anyway.
Right. Nick?
Some countries choose industrialization, while neighbors don't, like South Korea and North Korea. Right?
Yeah. And there are some that aren't given the option of choosing. There are some that can't get it. Now, one of the things that we did not have time for, these were two charts that I gave you on Friday. And I think next time we have Flex, I'm going to run you through this story if we have time, and we'll record it for the people that can't be there. We need to give you the story of Napoleon so that you understand the Congress of Vienna. But you have this chart already filled out that I gave you last class, and it's on vision. The one that we gave you that's not filled out, that you should spend a little bit of time on, is this. We just talked about industrialization. We talked a little bit about the outcomes. Your book talks specifically about aspects of society that are significantly impacted because of industrialization. it would be well worth your time, and even splitting up the work amongst a few people to get this chart filled out. All right, so next class, chapter 24. Make sure that you've read it. Make sure that you've read this chapter. If you haven't done it yet, you need this one. I promise you.